Hi, and welcome to the European Forest Institute's webinar on Jurisdictional Sustainability Monitoring. This is our second webinar as part of the EU RED Facility Learning Series. I'm Michaela Foster, a data and policy analyst here at EFI. And today I'm joined by several colleagues and partners who will share their experiences in Southeast Asia and West Africa in developing innovative approaches to monitor sustainability at the jurisdictional level. Let's turn to our first speaker.
Yes, so I'm Thomas Ambres, and I work at the European Forest Institute as land use governance expert. And I've been involved in the topic of the day at EFI on jurisdictional approaches, helping at technical level the different initiatives that we have in our partner countries in the tropical forest areas.
Hi, Thomas. Thanks so much for joining this webinar. You know, jurisdictional approaches, that's a pretty technical term. So maybe let's start by having you explain to us a bit what that means for the work at EFI.
Yes, I agree. It's quite a technical expression, and for some people, not easy to pronounce. But to remind ourselves what we mean by that, simply, a jurisdiction is a territory where a particular system of law is applied. For instance, a district, a state, a province, it can also be a municipality. And what we mean by jurisdictional approach or initiative is where in that territory there is a government-led initiative to address a specific issue. It can be deforestation, it can be a social issue, it can be a combination of things, or to increase benefits like farmer livelihoods, sustainable forest management, and so forth, across the specific area of that territory.
Thanks for that clarification, Thomas. It's quite interesting to hear that and then to reflect on what we hear about quite a lot nowadays with supply chain approaches, deforestation-free supply chains, the new regulation in the EU, the EU deforestation regulation, which are also areas that the EFI works on quite a lot. Could you explain to us why it's important for EFI to also work on jurisdictional approaches?
Yes, it's true that nowadays we hear so much about supply chain approaches that it seems that the work on territorial and jurisdictional approaches is a bit less prominent. But we've always been in our work, in our partnership work with tropical countries, looking at this topic. And from our experience, and I think this is the experience of most people working on these issues of trying to address tropical deforestation, there is no one solution to address the very resisting drivers of deforestation, but a need to really combine different approaches depending on the context, and especially to combine supply chain approaches with territorial approaches or jurisdictional approaches. Our work on jurisdictional approaches is really trying to help the partner countries address their drivers of deforestation. And as you mentioned, the EU deforestation regulation, the EUDR, it is clear that, I think it's important to clarify that jurisdictional approaches, and in particular, when they go up to territorial certification or verification initiatives, are not a substitute for those who need to meet the requirement of the EUDR when exporting products to the EU markets. At best, these initiatives can be used as a source of information in the risk assessment procedure. Having said that, I think for us it's so much beyond the topic of UDR and supply chain approaches. I think we have three main reasons why jurisdictional approaches are important from our perspective when working with partner countries. The first one is to reduce or address, to some extent possible, the risk of leakage across supply chains and territories.
Thomas, could you quickly tell us what leakage means?
Yes, so leakage is when you're trying to address a problem somewhere and the problem shifts somewhere else. You know, deforestation, water contamination, some social issues are among the many challenges that have this great capacity of shifting across places and supply chains. There are so-called leakage effects. These so-called leakage effects are a constant concern in efforts to reduce deforestation and forest degradation. And working at a territorial level, the bigger the territory, the better, allows for going beyond this inevitable fragmentation of other approaches that focus on just one supply chain or one group of actors in a territory. So that's clearly the first reason, to reduce the risk of leakage or displacement of the problem. The second reason is to build on the authority of governments that have the legitimacy and the power to control land use and supply chains over those specific territories. So this governance may have authority to issue regulations on land use planning, on tenure clarification, things that are so critical for the success of the intervention to reduce deforestation or address other issues. And the third reason is to better include vulnerable actors, small-scale producers, marginalized actors, informal actors that may not be included in other approaches like product certification or other interventions. The first one is the importance of clarifying the actual incentives for the jurisdictions that are making special efforts towards sustainability. So what is it really that they're going to get in doing that? Some are doing it for their own, their own decision and sake, but there are disincentives for doing that. So what are the incentives for doing it? And we heard the different speakers, it may be fiscal incentives, like in the Indonesian example. So fiscal transfers to jurisdictions that are performing well on sustainability indicators. Maybe improve market access. This has many often been said, but not so much realized. Or sometimes just reputational gains. It is important to celebrate progress, to give positive visibility to jurisdictions. They're also sensitive to positive reputation. Like, we talked before about the private sector. Companies are very sensitive. Some companies are very sensitive to their reputation. But this is also true for jurisdictions. And the Indonesia example is a good one, trying to bring positive visibilities to those districts, to those territories that are making progress towards sustainability in a way. This is the strategy of naming and faming, as opposed to naming and shaming, which is often used in some other contexts. But here we're really celebrating progress and naming and faming the progress. So that's one.
And in naming and faming, are there any tools or resources that you've piloted that have helped to bring this positive visibility to districts?
Yes, this is what we call the Jurisdictional Sustainability Monitoring dashboards that have been developed with our collaboration in both Indonesia and Côte d'Ivoire. So dashboards that provide visibility, that show the progress that territories are making towards a set of sustainability indicators, and celebrating that progress through yearly events, bigger gathering of actors, in bringing in international profile organizations. That is important, and that is helpful to name and fame this progress.
Okay, and these dashboards is it publicly available?
In the case of Indonesia, at least this is the case. It is publicly available, and it has been used, for instance, by Indonesia in the G20 event that they hosted last year in Indonesia.
Okay. And are there other enabling conditions that you'd like to highlight?
Yes, I think you briefly mentioned the role of transparency, and I think it should be emphasized. The role of data and transparency can be an accelerator for jurisdictional initiatives. Innovations in that space that we've seen the last few years, especially through our collaboration with the Trace initiative, has worked. We've seen that is was really helpful to be an enabler for further transparency and trigger pathway movement towards jurisdictional sustainability. So even if the initial data was not perfect for the different jurisdictions, having some initial data triggering the need for better data and disclosure of better data that very often exists but is not shared was clearly an accelerator for these processes towards jurisdictional sustainability.
So my name is Satrio Adi Wicaksono, and I am currently with IUCN Asia Regional Office. But until May of this year, I was actually with EFI, European Forest Institute, especially as part of the EU RED facility. So I was the lead person for Indonesia at EU RED facility.
Thanks for joining, Satrio. Could you tell us a little bit about the work that you've done with EFI on jurisdictional approaches in Indonesia?
Sure. Yeah, as you might know already, for EFI, jurisdictional approach is a promising methodology, a promising way, because we believe that subnational governments, especially in the context of such a huge and diverse country like Indonesia, they can play a leading role in driving towards sustainability, especially if we are talking in a context of production and trade of forest risk agricultural commodities such as palm oil. So as one of the topics that EFI has been working on is transparency in deforestation-free production and trade. So what we've designed, using jurisdictional approach as a basic premise, is a system called terpercaya. So the idea here is to design a system that can track and assess ways for districts to show that agricultural commodities like palm oil are produced sustainably and legally. So by legally, it means it's in compliance with national regulations.
Okay, and could you tell us what's unique about the Terpitaya approach compared to other jurisdictional initiatives?
Mm-hmm. So I think the key lesson learned from the Terpitaya approach is that we were able to show that building consensus on indicators to measure sustainability at the jurisdictional level is indeed possible. So the Tripartite approach has gone through many iterations. So it started in 2018. I myself, came in 2019 when I joined EFI. And then in 2020, 2021, it evolved into this project called KAMI, Keberlanjutan Sawit Malaysia and Indonesia. But I think throughout that process, what's really unique, what's really special about Tripartite is that we work together with multi stakeholders, many different stakeholders from government agencies, the private sector, as well as the local NGOs, in indigenous peoples organizations, to help define these indicators that are aligned with international expectation, what the market wants. So in this context, we are talking about the EU, we are considering EU deforestation regulation and so on, as well as align with the national regulations and vision. So we're talking about, how, we can capture Indonesia's plan to achieve the SDGs, Indonesia's plan to achieve its own national climate and sustainability strategy. So we're trying to see, like how well jurisdictions. So in the Indonesian context, it's districts or kabupaten, are aligned with those sort of like international expectations and national legal frameworks. And then we are doing this through through a lot of meetings, what we call advisory committee meetings.
So on advisory committees, could you tell us a little bit about what those committees looked like and what their role was in developing the Tripartite approach?
Sure. So there are several components of the advisory committee meetings of Tripartite. So of course, there's the government. And this whole process is led by Bappenas, which is the Indonesian National Development Planning Agency. So they've been very central since the very beginning. And especially there is one directorate within Bappenas that is in charge of food and agriculture. So that includes palm oil as well. So they've been chairing the meetings. I mean, this shows that there are sort of like a strong buy-in from the government. But it's not just Bappenas from the government. I mean, we also have Ministry of Home Affairs, for example. And the Ministry of Home Affairs is important because they are the ones who are overseeing, the subnational governments, the districts all over Indonesia. And then there are also some other relevant ministries such as Ministry of Agriculture, of course, Ministry of Trade, and so on. So that's from the government side. But we also have commodity producers and buyers. So all the players, oil palm players that are sourcing their palm oil from Indonesia, or those that have sort of like major mills and also palm oil plantations in Indonesia. Many of them were involved in this process. And also we have NGOs, and this includes sort of like indigenous peoples organizations and also voluntary certification bodies. So we benefited, these advisory committee meetings benefited from the collective wisdom of all these players, so that they were able to come up with these 23 indicators that are comprehensive, looking into the environmental components, the social components and economic components as part of these criteria that I mentioned before, which are currently named sustainability jurisdictions indicators.
So building consensus with many actors in any context, I think, is a challenge. But I imagine it's quite a big one, especially knowing the types of tensions and oppositions that exist in the palm oil sector between, let's say, producer countries and different actors within the country, the EU actors, NGOs. How was trust built in the process? You mentioned a lot of actors, government, private sector, civil society. How were you able to come together to build trust, to then align on the indicators?
I would say it takes time, but what's also important here, I mean, I would like to underline the role of the government. The fact that the government endorsed the process and they were able to help facilitate this whole process, I mean, that gives it legitimacy. I mean, I think first, I mean, to ensure that the space is one that is endorsed by the government, I think that's very, very crucial. And then we didn't really try to limit. Of course, we identify sort of like all these players. We try to identify champions, and I'm also would like to highlight the importance of champions. I mean, throughout the process, I mean, there have been many different advisory committee meetings, and people come and go. Some people they go there, they go to the advisory committee meetings representing their organizations. They do not always sort of like attend the whole like every meetings. I've seen people sort of like come and go, but I think what people appreciate is that they are updated about the process. So it gives trust for them. I mean, so maybe like they come to the event. I mean, in the first meeting they didn't say much, but then like in the following meeting, because they've seen that, you know, oh, okay, there is something for them. I mean, that it's actually like a safe space for them to share their perspective, and they know that this is really like a multi-stakeholder process that is based on sort of like you know, equality as well, because we are really trying to get everyone's perspectives. I mean, it creates trust. So they became, you know, more active in the following meetings and so on. So I've seen that happening. It takes time. You know, this goes back to the first point that I made. You know, but consensus were built. So for example, when we, just to give you another example, we were developing all these indicators, right? And then they gave some ideas on oh, okay, that particular indicator might be feasible, but the other one might not be feasible, and then because there might not be data available, and then like they give us some information about sort of like, you know, based on their experience, you know, such method might work, that methodology or proxy for obtaining data might be better than the other sort of like potential proxies. So they gave those kind of like inputs, and we keep them updated. So after we, for example, we go to the field, after we have other consultations like working group, FGD's consultation kind of thing. So we inform the main group, like the advisory committee meeting, and that's how like they felt involved, you know, through this iterative process.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for telling us about the advisory committee and their role and the benefits of having them as part of the process, as well as the importance of champions who can help advance the process. Could you tell us a little bit more about other aspects of the process so that we have a full picture of what the Terpercaya approach is?
Yeah. So what gives the Terpercaya approach even more credibility, I think its ability to communicate progress in a way that is efficient. I mean, as you know, it's, you know, the supply chain is such a complex process, and it is sometimes difficult to capture the complexity of the you know, the palm oil sector in Indonesia. Again, considering that Indonesia is such a huge country with different contexts from one district to another district, but what we are trying to do with Terpercaya, with the selected indicators, is that together with these members of the advisory committee, we try to create a data platform that is easy to understand, that is efficient, and can easily show that progress. And this is also a process, even like to create the data platform. This takes a lot of time, and then we rely on the inputs that were given by the members of the advisory committee. So just to give you some example, if you are talking about communicating district's progress towards sustainability, you know, there needs to be some thresholds, right? Thresholds for each indicator. I mean, this can be based on regulatory, scientific, and objective information, and on what constitutes sustainability. So this is something that we improved on over time based on the stakeholders' input. So the idea here is that we want to make sure that the platform serves its purpose, you know, for the different types of stakeholders. One example, for the national government, the data platform hopefully can give them ways to analyze districts that are performing better, and then they can give some incentives for to districts that are not quite there yet, but they're hoping to achieve certain other level. I mean, this could be useful for their fiscal incentive mechanism. And this is something that Bappenas has been discussing, and I know they're in the process of making this like a national policy.
Could you
So
tell
that's
us a
from
little
the
bit more about the
Yeah.
the fiscal transfer mechanism, like what
Sure,
that
sure.
would entail?
Yeah. So the fiscal transfer mechanism essentially, so Bappenas as the National Planning Development Agency, together with the Ministry of Finance, they are actually holding sizable budget that can be distributed to subnational governments. Sometimes the issue is that they're not sure yet, how they need how they can allocate such budget, especially we are talking about budget in the agricultural sector. So what happened is that the Directorate of Food and Agriculture of Bappenas is using terpercaya indicators as criteria to allocate such funding to subnational governments. So I'm not exactly sure now, sort of like what kind of formula they are using right now or will be using. But what I know is that they're planning to use terpercaya indicators and the grading system to help them in determining who should receive such allocation and how much. So that would be an example of how the platform can be used by the national government. But of course, especially from EFI's perspective, what we are interested in is how this platform really serves its purpose to give transparency to buyers, especially those from Europe. So the idea here is that this can give some more credibility. So to complement the voluntary certifications, for example, or even mandatory certifications like ISPO in the context of Indonesia, so that buyers they can be sure that they are sourcing from the districts that are performing well in terms of sustainability. So that's why for us, again, back to the data platform input, getting the right feedback from the potential users, such as those who are based in Europe, those potential buyers are very important. And that's what we've been doing, and that's how EFI has been, together with partners, has been improving the platform over time.
So it's a very good reminder that jurisdictional sustainability monitoring is really a means to an end, and that both the government and other stakeholders have various motivations for embarking on the terpercaya approach together. Are there any other objectives that you might want to highlight regarding sort of why stakeholders decided to engage in this approach?
Sure. I mean, they have also suggested. So one example of why I think the stakeholders are excited about this, again, because they feel like their voices can be heard. So, for example, they've also been providing some very useful feedback about to ensure that the system is legit. It needs to have a strong accountability, assurances, and then claims sort of like elements to it. So a mechanism for auditing and verifying the data used in the jurisdictional monitoring and supply chain traceability system to complement terpercaya, maybe to use sort of like third parties. I mean, that's something that has been talked about as well. And these kind of idea actually comes from the stakeholders themselves. And then there have been some discussions about how terpercaya should allow the identification of individual producers, mills, or smallholders. So to have sort of like a deeper information, deeper level of information to complement the district level information. So these kind of like suggestions, I think have been very useful for the Terpercaya team, the close partners that are working for Terpercaya. And I know like, at least based on my understanding, at the time when I left EFI, they were still being developed.
Could you tell us, or no, could you summarize for us a key takeaway or lesson learned from your experience with the Terpercaya approach?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. So maybe just to recap, Terpercaya is really built on the premise that subnational jurisdictions play an important role with regards to achieving sustainability in the context of especially forest risk, agricultural commodity production and trade. And Terpercaya also shows that building consensus on indicators to measure sustainability at the jurisdictional level is possible. And I think what like the key lesson learned also from the process is that yes, we can find an effective, efficient way to measure the performance of districts toward as they make their ways towards sustainability, and hopefully this can really accelerate impact at scale. You know, we are talking about promoting efforts to resolve many issues like land tenure issues, and also ensuring that smallholders and indigenous peoples are involved. So really a process that can complement mandatory and voluntary certification, which is which at the moment is more prominent, or we often hear about them. But this process of Terpercaya, I think it's an innovative, flexible approach that really has a lot of promise. Yes, it's not that easy to do. It takes time, as we discussed before. It takes time to build trust, to create this multi-stakeholder platform. But as Terpercaya has shown, it's doable, and it's doable because all the actors involved believe that Terpercaya, the process, and the data platform that results from the process offer a mutually beneficial sort of like aspect. So it's a win-win solution for actors across supply chains, both in producer and consumer countries.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that and sharing your experiences. And it seems very much like the Terpercaya approach. The power and in this approach is also it's that sustainability monitoring is not a sort of standalone piece, but really nested in a process, nested in the objectives and targets of the government as well as other stakeholders. Thanks a lot for sharing the experience in Indonesia. And now let's turn to talk about jurisdictional sustainability now in the context of Africa.
Hello, I'm Romuald Vaudry. I'm working for EFI, specifically for the countries of Côte d'Ivoire and Cameroon. And I'm specifically working on land use planning, jurisdictional approaches, and other sustainable issues.
Hi, Romuald. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar. To start off, could you tell us a little bit about your work on jurisdictional sustainability?
Yeah, sure. So in Africa, and despite official rhetoric or speeches, we have to say that many states are still highly centralized and are developing strategies that are not always well adapted to subnational contexts. And this is typically the case in the Republic of Congo, or in Cameroon and Côte d'Ivoire, where EFI works for years now.
Okay, so how can you see jurisdictional approaches helping in that context?
The idea we support is to develop jurisdictional approaches that are highly connected to the ongoing decentralization processes in terms of the transfer of competencies from the state to local governments and associated resources, of course, whether human or financial. It's important to say that in such countries, decentralization processes have been initiated for decades sometimes, but we're still lacking of some implementation guidelines or some proof of concept in the field. So this is the type of work we're supporting, and it's also very closely linked to our work in land use planning at the subnational level. For instance, in Republic of Congo, we have supported land use planning operation at departmental level. In Cameroon, it's at the municipal level, and it's at the regional and village level in Côte d'Ivoire as well.
Okay, very interesting point, and I think this relates back to one of our previous speakers who mentioned the importance of nesting a jurisdictional approach into a national process and the importance of nesting whatever approach into the national context. That was in Indonesia. Could you tell us a little bit more about how that looks in let's say in Côte d'Ivoire?
Yeah, and beyond Côte d'Ivoire, I would say that it's also important to note that the jurisdictional approaches we support are strictly within the legislative framework of the countries in which we operate. Actually, we are not inventing or creating anything. We are simply seeking to support decentralized local authorities in implementing actions that are already their responsibility. So in Côte d'Ivoire, for instance, and in the May region, we chose to support this May region because the regional council has a real leadership, which is to me a critical condition, a key condition to support or to implement such jurisdictional approach. It has a real vision of sustainable development. He recently supported, for example, the creation of a new natural reserve on its territory, and he committed to develop a green plan, or meaning a plan for the sustainable management of natural resources. And this green plan, again, is not coming from nowhere. It's strictly written in the Decentralization Act of 2003, so 20 years ago. But the May region would be one of the first regions of Côte d'Ivoire to implement or to develop first such a green plan.
Oh, that's very interesting. Could you tell us a little bit more about what is envisioned with the development of the green plan? How are stakeholders engaged in the process?
Yes, the idea is, again, not to invent or create anything, but is to adapt to the regional context all sectoral policies that have already been developed at the centralized level. For instance, we have a strategy on sustainable cocoa. We have a strategy on forestry. We have a strategy on other commodities, for instance, at the national level. But we need now, with the help of all stakeholders, including private sector and also civil society and other institutions, we need now to adapt these national strategies and politics at the regional level. And this is typically the work we are supporting through the development of this green plan, with the support, I have to mention this as well, with of the GIZ, which is our partner there.
Okay, that's great. And you mentioned land use planning work before. Is that incorporated into the green planning process?
Yes, good one. Good question, Michaela, because actually, regarding the law and this Decentralization Act, you cannot theoretically develop a green plan without having developed before a regional scheme, meaning a spatial planning for your region, a spatial planning operation for your region, and then a regional development plan which covers many thematics. including the natural resources sector. And then the Green Plan is coming to elaborate a bit more on this specific sector regarding the actions to be developed during the 5 next years, for instance.
Mm-hmm. And once you have the plan and you want to explore what happens afterwards, what approaches or tools do you have to monitor progress over time?
Yes, this was a tool that we proposed to the regions, to the Association of the Regions and Districts of Côte d'Ivoire, but also to the Ministry of Planning and Development. We have proposed them to develop a scorecard or a dashboard that is able to assess the level of sustainability of all regions of Côte d'Ivoire regarding some criteria that have been defined jointly with those organizations. And the idea is not only to characterize the level of sustainability of those regions, but also to highlight their achievements in terms of sustainable development of their territories. So we have identified 4 pillars and 4 indicators per pillar: economic, social, environmental, and governance. And through a quite complex calculation, we are able to calculate a level, an aggregated level of sustainability for the regions of Côte d'Ivoire. And so far, it's only targeting cocoa producing regions. But with the support of the Ministry of Planning and Development, we have decided to extend the analysis to the whole country and to transfer as well the tool to this ministry which is very interested in hosting such a tool for its own politics.
How do you envision the dashboard incentivizing further progress or action? Do you see it as a tool that can rally attention and action, that can motivate actors further towards sustainability?
Yes, definitely. We also hope beyond the assessment, the regular assessment of the level of sustainability, we also hope it could create a positive competition between regions regarding their level of sustainability. And we also maybe who knows, we can also think that some regions could be rewarded for their better scores in terms of sustainability than other regions. So maybe the centralized state could have an interest in discovering, yes, again, the various levels of the sustainability of their regions.
Okay, and I imagine a lot of data goes into the dashboard. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the indicators and the data that's used to measure them?
Yes, first, because it was not that easy to get some available and reliable data, so we relied on available data that are already quite reliable to develop such a calculation. And for instance, we relied on the past historical on the past analysis in terms of deforestation and degradation, because it's a public data in Côte d'Ivoire, and it has been produced by a national institute, so it's nationally recognized. And we worked with those data to assess the level, for instance, of the rates of deforestation/degradation in every region of Côte d'Ivoire. We also relied on the level of issuance of land certificates by the states by the state of Côte d'Ivoire in the regions. So to start this work and before this partnership that is ongoing with the Ministry of Planning and Development, we first relied on national available and reliable data.
And will the dashboard be made available publicly?
Yes, definitely. Everyone has access to this dashboard. The Ministry of Planning and Development already told us that in the future, maybe you will have various access regarding the institution or the organization you represent. They want to give full access to national institutions, of course, and maybe more restrictive access regarding the sensitivity of some data to external users, but it's not defined yet.
Okay, thanks for the information on the activities in Côte d'Ivoire. Could you tell us a little bit more about the work you're doing in Cameroon and Republic of Congo?
In Cameroon, it's pretty similar because we are strongly supporting the land use planning operations at the municipal level. And since municipalities in Cameroon are so huge, are so large, that it could lead to jurisdictional approaches at this geographical level as well. So far, it's only some thoughts that we have on this, but definitely the work on land use planning we've developed in the past years is a good basis for this, I guess.
Okay. And in the Republic of Congo?
Republic of Congo, we've supported there the elaboration of some departmental scheme in terms of land use planning. And it's a complete different scale in Republic of Congo because departments are very, very large in Congo. So not really sure that it's the best geographical scale to develop such jurisdictional approaches, but it will be discussed and with of course national stakeholders, but also with the Central African Forest Initiative, which is very interested in developing such subnational approaches in the Congo Basin.
Mm-hmm. So we've heard already the importance of nesting the approach in a national process. We've now heard a second lesson, which is regarding the scale of the intervention and the importance of scale. From your experiences in different African contexts, are there other key lessons that have come up on jurisdictional sustainability and what it takes for a successful jurisdictional approach?
Yes, I would say my main point is that if we want to develop jurisdictional approach, we need jurisdictions. And when I say that, it means that we need real jurisdictions with real leadership and real means to take the leadership on their own responsibilities, because sometimes you only have paper jurisdictions, without organization or local organization fully able to take their own responsibilities. So again, to develop a jurisdictional approach, we need first a jurisdiction and a leadership.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Romuald. I think now we have three important lessons, and I think quite interesting for all of us to reflect on those and in our different contexts. Thanks a lot for joining today.
You're welcome.
My name is Hung Le, and I'm from Vietnam. Currently, I'm working at Mekong Development Research Institute, or MDRI. A bit about my background, education is, so I did my PhD in the UK in Nottingham University. It's about public policy, but I mainly work in sustainability governance and like environmental sociology, that sort of thing. Yeah, simply that.
Hi, Hung. Thanks so much for joining for the webinar. Could you tell us a little bit about your work on jurisdictional approaches in Vietnam?
Okay, so about our work, so the aim of the project that we are currently working on is to support the development of jurisdictional approaches to agriculture and forestry management in the Central Highlands in Vietnam. And we do 2 case studies of Lâm Đồng Province and Đắk Nông Province. And yeah, in this work, we collaborate with AFI to do it since October 2021. But later on, I think in June 2022, we kind of promote the project a bit wider, so we sit in a broader EU project with the coordination of UNDP. So since June 2022, we work more closely with local stakeholders, especially local authorities.
Okay. And
Yeah.
you mentioned local stakeholders. How important are participatory approaches?
You mean the importance of that approach to them?
Yeah.
Okay. So on the literature, there are multiple important things to talk about. But in this case, I think I would choose the things that I think the most important for me. Firstly, is participatory means to help cover diverse opinions. Basically, when we get diverse people, diverse stakeholders, then we get different opinions into one place. And we can also bring in diverse strengths and opportunities. Because collaboration opportunities may arise from multi-stakeholder consultations or discussions. Like some people, they may not know each other before that, or they may not know that, oh, we can collaborate in this and that. So that's one opportunity. And it can also reveal different obstacles for inclusive considerations, because basically from researchers' side, from government side, from enterprise side, we have different concerns. We think about different things, and we think that other people might have this difficulties or that. But when we talk to each other and we talk to different people, then we know more obstacles, more challenges that they might have that we haven't thought about. So that kind of brainstorming together. So for me, basically, is jurisdictional approach in a participatory manner. It basically is an approach to mobilize resources and exchange opinions effectively. And because of that, it may be able to help limit conflicting issues in governance processes by addressing them even at the start through participatory discussions and consensus building. So that's, I think, for the case study that we are doing, that's kind of the key meaning in it.
Mm-hmm. So it seems quite clear that participatory approaches are very important. Could you tell us a little bit about the strategies that you've developed to engage stakeholders in a participatory way?
Mm-hmm. The strategy sounds a bit big, but basically we have, so because of the manner of our project, we need to work with many stakeholders even within the project. So that's one aspect of participatory within our teams and the other teams. And also we need to interact with local authorities a lot and interact with other non-state actors locally a lot. And throughout the whole process, we try our best to embed the kind of multi-level governance perspective and abide to the inclusive and equitable principles throughout the whole engagement process. And by multi-level governance, I mean, well, in theory, it means like vertical and horizontal interactions of actors and try to include them. But in this project, it means reaching out to diverse actors within the state and non-state sectors. And we started from higher levels in the vertical governance relationships, because we started with development, international development organizations, for example, AFI Institute, UNDP, IDH, or those actors, they brought in the opportunity. And then we started with them building connections with national and local level governments. So basically in Vietnam, the governmental system, it works in hierarchy. So we kind of go along with it first to align with the system. So vertically, we go through the levels, and then we access, as each level we access to other stakeholders on a horizontal sphere. You can imagine that it's like circles, overlapping circles. They have common benefits, they have common problems, they have connections. So we gain access to them through the key vertical line first. And then, for example, we need to map out their interactions and their relationships. But I mean politically and also institutionally, because we need to identify who has what power They can support or challenge whom or who benefits and what benefits, or who loses and what they lose in what case, even what barriers are attached to what types of stakeholders, because even the powerful one would have their own barriers. So we did all of that kind of stakeholder mappings. And then we follow the value chains. So specifically in our case, that would be a coffee value chains in the Central Highlands. So we follow value chains of our actors and try our best to engage as many actors around that value chains as possible. And also, as I said, we identify the key actors first, and from them we explore the others surrounding their connections. And yeah, we happen to see sometimes there are actors that we didn't know, we haven't heard of, like they were lagged behind, but then within our project we try to engage them, and then and also other actors, other in international development organizations, they also had their own resource, and we brought together and we could explore more actors that we haven't heard of before. And also another thing is the inclusive and equitable principles that we set as our key principles. There would be many principles around that, but for me that would be respectful. So we respect the stakeholders' roles. They have their own roles within the whole system. We respect that. We respect people when communicating with them. And we even respect the existing governance system. So whatever we do, we need to consider that if it needs them like dramatic changes to the system or not. Because if it needs that, it may not be successful. It costs a lot to change the whole governance system. So we need to respect that as well. And also we need to align with the gender inclusive approach. I mean, seeking and supporting, for example, female voices in all cases. I use supporting and enable rather than including, because it's not just including. Inclusivity is not just including, because if we include them within a power imbalance situation, then it's not inclusive. And their voice would not be heard anyway. So in our project, we try different approaches to make it enabling and supporting to include female voices in there. And also, so for example, we whenever we conduct training discussions, for example, we made a training course and we have discussions, we break out into small groups, and we try to have female that can speak out in that group, or we do individual interviews with female people so that they feel more confident sharing their opinions without any challenging voices from the other actors. And yeah, we just need to be constantly being aware of the power relations between actors and try to mediate the situations. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like the centering inclusion is quite key to the success of jurisdictional approaches. Are there other enabling conditions or key takeaways that you've learned from your experiences that you could share?
Basically, well, to be honest, I think if we talk about sustainability at local level, and for example, in this project, it focuses on farmers, local enterprises, and local authorities, and how they prepare themselves to, how they can be prepared for upcoming regulations change at the international level. It relates directly to their income, to their trading prospects, and all of the things like inclusivity and gender balance that we talk about. It all comes back to the puzzle of cost, benefit, opportunity mediation. Because in theory, we can say you need to plant this tree here, this crops there, so that you can earn more profits. But when the market prices change because of someone else, then they will just change their practices. So I think the approach need to be, the governance approach need to be in a more systematic way, and not just locally. When we talk about jurisdictional sustainability, we don't mean to set boundaries, but we need to think in a kind of like multi-level and inter-jurisdictional sustainability. Does it make sense? Because yeah, this jurisdiction would cross over another jurisdiction in the end. So yeah, because there might be challenging opinion that when we say jurisdiction, it means a boundary. But it's not in this case. It's like connecting jurisdictions and how to bring the profits, the benefits to the most people within the jurisdiction, basically to all people within that jurisdiction first, and then spreading out that, how to say, positive energy to the others as well.
So speaking of the topic of needing to build a common understanding in a jurisdiction, how have your approaches or projects helped to define sustainability so that everyone in the jurisdiction or in multiple jurisdictions are clear on what is meant by sustainability?
It's been very challenging. I'm not even sure if everyone understands what it means now. Because
do you have any ways to measure sustainability?
We just need to simplify the wording and give very concrete examples. Because of the participatory manner, it means that we will communicate a very complex issue with people with immensely diverse background, like technical background, understanding background, even language background, because we have ethnic minority people. We have foreigners talking to Vietnamese. We have even linguistic barrier in terms of translating the English meaning of sustainability or jurisdictional sustainability into Vietnamese. It has ever been exist, for example, some norms, some concepts has not been mentioned in Vietnamese, then even that is difficult. So, and also another difficulty is that there are so many parallel efforts going on at the moment to one place. For example, in the Central Highlands, a lot of projects doing similar things, not exactly the same, but also people refer to sustainable development, sustainable agriculture, sustainable businesses. So the key issue with us in this project is how to make people understand jurisdictional sustainability and what it means, what it can help them. So we did, like, that's why it took much longer time for the project than expected, because we needed like half a year, something, just to keep communicating and explaining the same thing all over again and again, and to not just to local stakeholders, but to our project partners. Even our project partners, they have their own thinking. It is, I don't mean that they don't understand, but they just understand in a different way. We understand our things in a different way. So even within the technical teams, we just need a lot of communications to bridge the gaps between us and to find a common space where we can collaborate and simplify things for local actors to adopt it. And then we go together to them and explain to them and back up each other for what they don't understand. I mean, we just need a lot of team up. And yeah, basically just to simplify difficult things and yeah, when we talk, for example, we talk to farmers about sustainability, come on, it's just about plant the trees, coffee, sell it, and you can plant it again. And you can still sell it again. with good prices. That's what they care. We just can't talk about any scientific thing to them. On jurisdiction, what does it mean for them? Just their farms. That's their farms. They just know that that's their farms. This is the community, their community. That's it. And similar people living together in that community. So for them, the definition would be very different. But we just need to try to. So firstly, we need to learn how other people understand things, so that we can speak in the way that they would understand. I don't mean the language, because we don't know all languages, but I mean the practice, the implications, the angle, the perspective that people know too when they think about something. So in our case, it's like that. And we need a gatekeeper, not a gatekeeper, and kind of intermediary to actor, someone in between, someone standing in between to connect us to different communities. Like local authorities is also one community, and speaking their technical language is difficult, even in Vietnamese, like even in our language. But our scientific language is different from their administrative language. And we need someone to bridge that gap. That's why in the project, there are two coordinators, like field coordinators, to bring in people to make sure that people use kind of similar languages and similar understandings. So I think that's very important. The communication is very key.
Certainly, it sounds like a major challenge. In the project, have you built a framework to understand sustainability in a way that can be translated to all the different actors?
We basically have, like, because one of our outputs is a jurisdictional sustainability monitoring and evaluation framework, which is basically a set of indicators and how to measure that, and a protocol to collect information for that. So when we develop the indicators, we break down into dimensions. And so basically everyone would talk about sustainability in 3 columns, 3 pillars, whatever, like the UN's definition. That's what everyone knows. They understand. Well, I don't know if they understand the real meaning of it, but if you ask someone here within our project what sustainable development means, they would say, yeah, environmental. So like economic growth and social aspect together. Okay. So we need to follow their way of thinking and then break down for them that, okay, we need that dimension of environmental dimension. And we have the social economic dimensions, how to balance that through what kind of indicators you can measure that. And then we need to make sure that your governance system goes well to track the progress. And we need to make sure that all of what we are doing would be legalized, like legal, about to the local law system, so that you can export or you can sell to others. So yeah, we just try to stand by them, stand by their side from the same perspective, and explain that each dimension, what it means and what it can benefit them. But we do have kind of framework in our indicator settings. Yeah.
Okay. Could you give us an example of one of the indicators, just so the audience can understand what we're talking about?
Indicator. So, for example, we because within our statistics, so the national statistics, it does have some indicators relating to, for example, forest monitoring already. But what we try to do is to use their existing data and to measure something similar but more meaningful for to track deforestation or forest development, for example. So an example is an indicator about forest cover rates on agricultural land. So within our statistics, there is only an indicator about forest coverage, indicator about agricultural land. But we need to measure if on agricultural land, forests can be developed, which means they do more agroforestry, they plant more forest, even when they do agriculture. So that's an example. I don't know if it is more understanding.
Yes, that's very helpful. Yeah. Could you also tell us how the indicators were developed? Like, what was the process like to come up with a set of indicators for the framework?
Okay, so like I said earlier, we set up the principles that the indicators need to be based on the existing database and governance and data management systems as much as possible. We prioritize indicators that have the highest data availability status. So we don't want to make local authorities and other stakeholders to invent new data too much. Of course, some indicators would need that. But for those indicators that need additional data or data creation, even that new creation need to align with the governance prospect, the government's vision of data management. So for example, Vietnam is pushing towards digitalization for the governance system. So we know that in the future, maybe near future, there would be digitalized data on forest map, on crops maps, or something like that. So we try to fit what we propose on that verge. So that would be either available data or going to be available data. Mm-hmm. So that's a first principle. And then the second one is, it's also like the first one. It means align with like existing policy landscape and the master plan and objectives therein. So if they set what objectives, we align with their objectives, and then we make further proposals if needed. But the first one would be what they plan to do, and we try to support them, local authorities, how to track what they want to do, how to improve what they want to do. We don't try to tell them, oh no, you don't need to do, you shouldn't do that, you do the others. We don't do that. We don't try to do that. So for the steps, we basically started, when we collaborated with AFI, so we started with AFI's ideas and your lesson learned from other cases. So for example, in Southeast Asia, we kind of learned quite a lot from the case in Indonesia, Terpercaya. Yep. So we got that list of indicators and the framework, how they did in Indonesia. And then we did a review of policy and legal system in Vietnam. And a review of the, basically to align AFI's proposed ideas with Vietnam's policy landscape and planning visions, to find common spaces and differences. So for what difference we would adapt our differences into the ideas, but not exactly the same set of indicators. And then we conducted multi-stakeholder consultations to identify policy and legal gaps within the Vietnamese context. So we produced a gap analysis, we produced a legal review, and like I said earlier, we produced a stakeholder mapping to identify stakeholders, and also because it will also affect the data flow, who owns what data and who can share what as well. And then we identify 4 jurisdictional dimensions, sustainability dimensions, which are in line with international deforestation-free policy orientation. For example, we've got the coming EUDR, so we try to align with that as well, and that's basically to merge Vietnamese policy visions with international regulations. because we need to prepare Vietnam's agricultural products for international output markets along with pursuing sustainability. So that's 4 dimensions are environmental, social, economic, governance, and legality. And then the next step we need to collaborate with other partners within our broader project as well, because as I mentioned earlier that we share some overlapping outputs tasks. So we need to make sure that we exchange ideas and align each other's works to make something meaningful and simple enough for local people to use. Otherwise, they would have a bunch of indicators, a bunch of platforms, whatever, and they don't know what is what. So we did that collaboration and kind of aligning and incorporate each other's indicators and ideas to work together. And then we started to develop the indicators for each dimension that I mentioned earlier. And again, based on the policy and legal review analysis that we did. And after we have a set of indicators, we did multiple rounds of consultations, stakeholder consultations, including we did in-depth consultations with local authorities and also non-state actors. So basically via technical meetings or consultation workshops. And we also sent letters, so we tried to gain both written and verbal feedback, and yeah, we did a lot of revision for the indicators and make sure that the indicators are what local actors need and not what we think that they need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And now that you have the framework with the indicators, what's the next step or the way forward after this project ends?
Well, I mean, this question is a bit beyond my scope because what we do is that we set up a framework. We try to make the most suitable proposal that we think can be helpful for them and can be adopted for local authorities in Vietnam. But it's really difficult for them to directly adopt anything because of the governance system here is a top-down system. So basically, well, it has strengths and weaknesses. Basically, for example, statistics and also data management would go in a vertical line from top to the bottom. So the national system, the national authorities, government would have guidelines for what kind of data to collect, to manage, to report within the system. And subnational bodies would do that, would follow that. So in this project, we tried something different. We tried a bottom-up approach. It may be helpful, but then it may be helpful as a reference source for local authorities. Like, for example, this is what we told them as well. You can use our proposed indicator set like a checklist to know your progress. It can help to report in other fields as well in your daily work basis. But even if they don't adopt it fully in the system because of the institutional setting, they can still have a reference source. They have a reference to a methodology to do something. They know if they want to propose something, they can do that. And also for non-state actors, if they, for example, some big businesses locally, if they know the indicators, they can set up indicators for themselves to track their own progress within their jurisdiction, their production area. So I think what we do is to give people an ideas and a framework, a kind of a general guideline of how to do things, how to do these indicators things, and how it can be useful. So for this project, I think that would be kind of outcome.
Certainly, it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity for this work to spread out and to also support broader sustainability efforts in context outside of just the couple of provinces you work in the Central Highlands.
Yep.
Great. So thank you so much for joining us for this webinar, and hope to see you soon. All right, back to you, Satriel, on a related aspect. We've heard already a lot about experiences from you in Indonesia, as well as in Côte d'Ivoire, Cameroon, Congo, Vietnam, on progress towards sustainability at the jurisdictional level. But we haven't heard so much about legality and how legality can be a framework, a foundation for sustainability. Could you tell us a little bit about how legality has been incorporated into sustainability monitoring in Indonesia?
Yeah, totally. So, of course, legality is a foundation for sustainability. And if we look at the EU deforestation regulation, for example, I mean, it clearly says that the production of forest risk commodities, need to be aligned, need to comply with the regulations of the countries where the commodities are produced. So in the context of Indonesia, what the EU RED facility has been doing for years is try to improve Indonesian legal frameworks in the sense that to clarify actually what does the Indonesian legal frameworks say about deforestation and how that can be monitored, because that would be one easy way to see compliance with the legal frameworks itself, and also to address any gaps in legal frameworks with regard to deforestation, if any. So we've been supporting efforts to clarify all these aspects through various studies over the years.
Okay, and in addition to clarifying the legal framework, is it possible to track compliance with the law?
Yep. I believe it's possible. I mean, it's not that easy. I mean, this has been tried by some other organizations, but at least based on one of the studies that we've done, this is possible. So the idea here is that we try to assess the legality of deforestation in Indonesia. So in the context of Indonesia, the term that we are using is planned and unplanned deforestation. So we need to understand the legal context, right, of Indonesia to identify what can constitute planned and unplanned deforestation. So to do so, we need to define some indicators. So that means we need to look into what Indonesian legal frameworks say about this. And sometimes there can be confusion because of different definitions that can be used by Indonesia or by some other countries. But what we did was we consulted with some stakeholders in Indonesia, so that we at least we get some better understanding of, like, certain criteria that can be utilized to identify planned and unplanned deforestation.
And I imagine data might be a challenge in trying to monitor legality. How did considerations of data play into defining the indicators and measuring them?
Yeah, I think data is certainly important. Even after we came up with some indicators for legality, and I remember in the case of Indonesia, actually some of those sort of like indicators, need to be tweaked because of inavailability or non-availability of data sets with regards to such indicators, especially some of those data might not be available at a larger scale, or not covering the whole country, or it can be very patchy. They might not be in a digital format. So, and then they might be placed in different different organizations, for example. So it's really difficult to collect some of them. So, which is why a review of the available data need to be completed. And this is an integral part of defining the indicators itself. So, and again, I mean, this goes back to the idea of like how we can track the legality, how we can define and assess legality in a way that is efficient, in a way that is feasible, really. And so I think some adjustments might be needed here and there, but again, I mean, even though there might be some caveats, at least with such exercise, we are getting closer to the truth, or like to the situation on the ground.
As you mentioned, it's important that the indicators are aligned with the legal framework. But as we know, in almost every country, the legal framework isn't static, it changes over time. How do you incorporate these changes into the methodology?
Yeah, so just to give you one example, recently in Indonesia, there is this omnibus law, like an all-encompassing law that changes a lot of other laws, including those that are related to forests and land use sector. So this is called the job creation law, and I believe because of that law, like a lot of like regulations related to what constitutes planned and unplanned deforestation are also changed. And we actually also commissioned another work on this. So we published actually a study on how this omnibus law on job creation change Indonesian context of Indonesian legal frameworks on deforestation. And so what I wanted to say is that this means that the indicators, if we are using such indicators to track and assess deforestation, needs to be updated whenever major laws are modified, or new laws with regards to forestry and land use are updated. So yeah, I would say that's another challenge. If we were to create such a tool to assess planned and unplanned deforestation, updates might be needed, especially in the context of countries where major updates in the law could happen often.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, so I see now two major things. One, the indicators need to really match the legal framework and to be sure that they're updated accordingly, but also that they need to be updated depending on the availability of data and importantly, the availability of data at the scale of analysis.
Certainly, yes.
Yeah, speaking of getting closer to the situation on the ground and monitoring legality compliance, what reactions did the initial results of the study provoke with different actors?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, so you're right, there were a few phases of the studies. So this was done in multiple phases, and I remember like when the initial results came in, I think some of the people that we consulted with, they responded by saying that maybe some tweaks would be needed, maybe also checks on the ground are needed just to help verify that. And that proves to be a very good suggestion, because when our partners went to the field, to do some ground truthing, some verification. I mean, it's clear that some tweak to the indicators will be needed. And I think, I mean, this shows again that, back to the issue of data, incomplete data matters, and there will always be some caveats with regard to the indicators, and especially, how some of these legal frameworks are implemented on the ground. There are all these limitations, but again, this also shows that further investigation in some places are needed. A field assessment is really crucial. Again, I mean, what we want, this is means for an end, right? I mean, in any case, the hope is that after policymakers, including Indonesia, they got some ideas about the extent of unplanned deforestation in certain areas, they go to the ground to do some checking. And I think that is actually, if they do that, then that shows that, yes, this is like a useful tool, for them to get like an early estimate of possible illegal or unplanned deforestation in an area. But as to sort of like the real situation on the ground, it's something that definitely needs to be checked by the authorities.
Sure. So it seems that there's the verification as part of the methodology, but this approach can also be used by governments as part of their controls and other activities to promote sustainability in different areas.
Yes, certainly, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Satrio, for joining today. Tama, from everything that we've heard and your experiences that you've shared from different contexts, are there any key takeaways or lessons learned that have emerged on the topic of jurisdictional sustainability that you could share with us?
Yes, I think we've mentioned a few ones before when we talked about enabling conditions, but just very to sum up, really from my perspective, lesson one, it is really critical to clarify the incentives for the jurisdictions and celebrate progress when progress is made towards sustainability. So being able to provide visibility to this. Second, the role of data and transparency as an accelerator for jurisdictional initiatives. We've talked about that. The third is really to link to the first lesson, maybe, is important to frame the indicators of jurisdictional sustainability in positive terms, not just in terms of risk, risk of deforestation, risk of fires, risk of conflicts. Like the example of land conflicts, for instance, in Indonesia, it was felt more attractive and appealing to the stakeholders to monitor that in terms of number of conflicts resolved and try to get data on that rather than just monitor the number of conflicts. So have something more inspiring and try to measure net positive impact beyond the risks. And maybe a fourth lesson or takeaway that I think others have mentioned in this learning event is the importance to establish a national framework that encourages jurisdictional approaches, jurisdictional initiatives at decentralized level. So having the two levels, the national and the decentralized level, working together. So in a harmonized framework at the national level to assess progress, to reward progress, to provide positive visibility, to clarify the incentives, to exchange lessons, etc. Just this part alone without the other one wouldn't go as far as the two together.
Certainly, and I think we've also heard from our speakers on this point the importance of leadership and a strong will to engage on these approaches, which I think is quite complementary to your points. Thank you very much, Tama, for joining.
Thank you, Michaela.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks to all for joining today's learning event on jurisdictional sustainability.